Save yourself the shame and cancel. My sister sent that 5 hours before my wedding, timed so I'd read it in my dress. That was the point. My mother had already texted that the whole family, all 45 of them, wouldn't show. I stood there at the vanity, veil half pinned, while the people who were supposed to give me away counted down the hours to make sure I'd be alone in it. I didn't text back. I didn't cry. I set the phone face down and finished pinning my veil, because my hands, at least, still knew what to do. My name is Della Marsh. I'm 35. For 35 years, this family kept me, the way you keep a coat you mean to give away. They thought 2 messages would end my wedding. They were wrong about what would end. Then my grandmother took my hand and smiled like she'd waited decades for this. Let them miss it. They have no idea who's walking you down the aisle. To understand how she could say that, we have to go back. Before we do, if this is already sitting heavy in your chest, take a second to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I read everyone. So, back to the beginning, back to a house where no one ever set a chair for me. The Renners were the kind of family people in our valley used as a measuring stick. The good silver, the clean porch, the pew near the front at the Dundee church. My stepfather, Gerald, kept a tidy lawn and a tidier reputation, and when he died 2 years ago, the whole town came to say what a fine man he was. I came too. I sat in the back. I remember a man at the funeral, an usher in a borrowed-looking suit, leaning down to me with a kind face. "Are you with the family?" he asked. I'd known Gerald for 33 years. I'd called him by his first name across 1,000 dinners, and I sat there in a black dress in the back of his service and could not, for a second, think of the right answer. "Sort of," I said. That was the truest thing anyone said about me that whole day. That's where I always sat, in any room that belonged to them. In the back. I learned it young, the way you learn which stair creaks. In their house, there was a long wall in the hallway, dark frames all the way down it, and I must have walked past that wall 10,000 times. School portraits, Christmas mornings. Gerald with his arm around my mother. My sister Colette in every stage of growing up, gap teeth, braces, cap and gown. I'm not on that wall, not once. I checked, the way you keep checking a sore tooth with your tongue. "We're a Renner family, Della," my mother told me when I finally asked about it, years ago. She didn't even look up from her tea. "You've always been a Marsh." She said it the way you'd explain the weather. Not cruel, just true in her mind, and settled. A door she'd shut so long ago she'd forgotten it had ever been open. I want you to understand the house before I tell you the rest, because the house is where the lie lived. After Gerald died, something shifted in it. My mother started using a word she'd never used in front of me. The account. "We have to be careful with the account now," she'd say to Colette in the kitchen in a voice I wasn't supposed to hear. Once I came in for a glass of water and they both went quiet, mid-sentence, because the subject was me. I assumed it was Gerald's estate. I assumed it was none of my business. I was wrong about both, but I didn't know that yet. There's a memory I keep, sharper than the others. I'm maybe 7. It's Thanksgiving, the table loaded, every chair taken, and there's no chair for me. My mother glances at the seats, counts heads, and waves a hand toward the garage. We ran out of places. "Pull the folding chair, would you?" So I pulled it. Cold metal, the kind that pinches the back of your knees. I set it at the corner where the table narrows, half in the doorway. And I ate Thanksgiving dinner from the corner of my own family's table, and nobody thought anything of it, least of all me. You can do that to a child once, and it's an accident. You can do it every year, and it stops being an accident and starts being an answer. It was my grandmother who looked at me that day. "Opal." My mother's mother, 80-something even then, with hands like folded paper. She watched me on that metal chair, and something moved across her face, and she said, almost to herself, "He'd have loved to see this." "Who would, Grandma?" I asked. She opened her mouth, closed it, patted my hand and said nothing, and nobody else at that table asked who he was. They just kept passing the gravy. I think about that a lot now, how a whole family can hear a sentence with a hole in it and decide, together, not to look inside. Here's the part that will matter later, so I'll tell it plainly. I grew up to do a very specific job. I'm a paralegal, trusts and estates. All day, every day, I help families make sure that what one person built lands exactly where they meant it to land. I read the instruments. I check the language. I find the line that says who gets what, and when, and under what condition. The morning of my wedding, in fact, I'd already emailed a client a clean summary of her late husband's trust, who inherited, on what date, no surprises. I was good at giving other people that kind of certainty. I protect other people's inheritances for a living. I told Sam once, early on. I never thought I had one of my own. He laughed because I'd said it like a joke. I'd meant it like a joke. That's the thing about the truth in my family. They'd taught me to hand it over with a smile, so it wouldn't weigh anything. My mother remarried into the Renner name when I was 2 years old. That's the official beginning of me, as far as anyone in that house was concerned. Before that, there's a blank. And the blank had a shape, and the shape was a man nobody would name. What I had instead was a rule, repeated so often it stopped sounding like words. You're lucky to be here. Not every girl gets a family to take her in, my mother liked to say. Remember that. Take her in, as though I'd arrived on a doorstep in a basket, as though my own mother had done me a charity by keeping the daughter she gave birth to. I felt the blank most at school, on the forms. There was always a line. Father's name. The other kids filled it in without thinking. I'd sit with my pencil over the space and leave it empty, and a teacher would frown at the gap, and I'd say, "He passed away," because that was the answer I'd been handed, and watch the frown turn soft and apologetic. I got very good at making adults uncomfortable in that particular way. I didn't know I was lying. I thought I was telling them the saddest true thing about me. Colette came along when I was 6, and Colette was a Renner from her first breath. Gerald's blood, my mother's blood, the real article. I don't blame Colette for the way she was raised. She was raised to believe the house was hers, and I was a guest in it, and children believe what they're taught. When we were small, her birthdays filled the backyard. Streamers, a rented pony one year, the whole class. Mine were quieter. "We'll do something small for you," my mother would say, and small is what we did. A cake on a weeknight. Candles and the 3 of them watching me blow them out like they were waiting for it to be over. By the time we were grown, Colette said the cruel things the way you'd hum a song you'd known forever. No malice in her face, just the tune. "You're not actually a Renner, though," she said to me once, at 25, passing it across a dinner table like the salt. Nobody corrected her. My mother sipped her wine. There was a day in grade school. A Saturday, a father-daughter thing in the gym, pancakes and a craft table. The flyer came home in my backpack, and I left it on the kitchen counter for a week, hoping. Nobody picked it up. The morning of, I asked if Gerald might take me. My mother was packing Colette's bag for a different outing. "He's busy, sweetheart," she said. Not unkind, just final. And he's not really your dad, is he? It would be strange. So I didn't go. I told my teacher on Monday that we'd had something else on. I was 9, and I already knew how to make my own absence sound like a choice. That's a thing they taught me without ever meaning to, how to stand outside a door and call it standing. I used to stand in the hallway outside the living room when they had company, waiting to be called in. Not invited, called. There's a difference, and your body learns it. My shoulders would come up around my ears. My breath would go shallow. I'd wait for my name, and when it came, "Della, come say hello," I'd walk in like I'd been let in, because that's exactly what had happened. I'd shake the guests' hands, and they'd say what a lovely family, and I'd smile and not correct the count. The one warm thing in that house came from Opal, and it came in secret. I was small, 5, maybe, when she pressed something into my hand under the table. A little carved bird. A wren, I'd learn much later, though I didn't know the word then. It was wood, smooth as a river stone, worn pale where a thumb had rubbed it for years before it ever reached me. "From someone who loves you," she whispered. "Keep it where she can't see." I closed my fist around it. It was warm. Wood shouldn't feel warm, but that one did, like it had been carried in a pocket all the way to me, a long way, by a hand that didn't want to let go. My mother saw it anyway, a week later, plucked it out of my hand and turned it over with 2 fingers, like something she'd found in a drain. "What is this cheap little thing?" She held it over the trash can. I can still see it, hanging there above the coffee grounds. I cried, quietly because I'd learned that too, and she sighed and handed it back, and I hid it in a sock in the back of a drawer, and I kept it through every move, every house, every year. I have it still. It was in my bag the morning of my wedding. When I was old enough to ask about my father directly, I got one answer, and I got it once. I was 12. I'd worked up the nerve for a week. I asked my mother at the sink while she had her back to me, because it was easier not to see her face. What was my dad like? The water kept running. Her shoulders didn't move. "He died before you were born," she said. "There's nothing to tell." "But what was his—" "Della?" She turned the tap off, turned around. Her face was perfectly calm and perfectly closed, and something in it told me, at 12, never to open this door again. "There's nothing to tell. Set the table." No photographs, no name said aloud, no grave I was ever taken to. A man reduced to a single sentence and a blank space on a hallway wall. I had exactly one thread back to him, and I didn't even recognize it as a thread. Every year on my birthday, a small parcel arrived. No return address. Sometimes a little wrapped box, sometimes just an envelope. Thick, hand-addressed in careful capitals. If my mother got to the mail first, she'd lift it off the pile, read the front, and set it aside without a word. "Wrong address," she'd say, if I happened to be there. And the parcel would vanish, and I'd never see what was inside. 35 birthdays, 35 parcels, wrong address every single time. You'd think a person would notice. You'd think a grown woman who reads documents for a living would do the math. Same handwriting, same day every year, 35 years running, wrong address. But that's the trick of being raised inside a story. You don't question the story, because the story is the water and you're the fish. It took someone reaching in and lifting me out before I could see it for what it was. Then I met Sam. I won't spend long here, because Sam isn't the point. But he's the reason the whole thing finally cracked, so you should know one thing about him. Sam chose me out loud, in front of people, without checking first whether it was allowed. When he proposed and I said yes, I drove to my mother's house to tell her. I don't know what I expected. Something, a hand on my arm. A cake from the grocery store with my name spelled wrong. She was at the kitchen table with her tea. Colette was at the counter, scrolling her phone. I held up my hand so the ring caught the light. "Sam asked me to marry him," I said. I said yes. My mother set her tea down very slowly and did not get up. "You're getting married," she repeated. Not a question, a number she was trying to remember. Colette didn't turn around. "You're sure he knows what he's marrying into?" she asked the window. I laughed it off. Of course he knows. He's met you all. But something was wrong in that kitchen, and I could feel it on my skin, the way you feel a storm an hour before it arrives. My mother's face had gone a careful, controlled white. She wasn't looking at the ring. She was looking past it, at the calendar on the wall, at the dates, like a clock about to chime something she dreaded. "Well," she said finally, "that's a lot to think about." Not congratulations. A lot to think about. What followed over the next weeks, I read as cold feet on their part. Their cold feet about my wedding, which I couldn't understand, but which I was used to not understanding things in that family. It came at me from every direction, always gentle, always reasonable. At Sunday dinner, my mother brought it up between the chicken and the pie. "There's no rush, you know," she said. "A year won't change anything. Why don't you wait a year? Be sure." "You've known him, what, 2 years?" Colette added, right on cue, like they'd practiced it in the car. "That's nothing. People show you who they are at year 3. "And money's tight now," my mother said, folding her napkin. "With Gerald gone. This really isn't the season for a big expensive party. If you waited—" "I'm paying for it myself," I said. A small silence. My mother and Colette traded a look across the table, fast, the kind of look that has a whole conversation in it. I didn't know how to read it then. I do now. "Still," my mother said, "there's no rush. Wait a year. There's no rush. Money's tight." I heard 3 different worries. "I see now it was the same worry," said Three-Ways. A countdown they couldn't say out loud. It wasn't only the 2 of them either. That month, an aunt I spoke to maybe twice a year called me out of nowhere, warm as anything, to say the family only wanted me to slow down, that a woman my age shouldn't let a man rush her into a wedding the rest of them hadn't had any say in. I thanked her and got off the phone before I thought to wonder how an aunt 2 towns over knew the date at all, or why it was the family's to have a say in. Someone had told her. Someone had been making calls. My 35th birthday came that spring, a few weeks before the wedding, and right on schedule, the parcel arrived. I happened to be at my mother's when the mail came. I watched her lift it off the pile, thicker than usual, the capitals on the front neat and deliberate, and go still for half a second before she set it face down on the counter, address hidden, like a card she didn't want me to see. "Wrong address," she said, and slid it under a stack of bills. I held it for a moment first, before she took it back. The paper was heavy. The postmark was smudged but local, close, not far away. Wrong address. I almost asked. I didn't. I handed it over, because that's what I'd been trained to do, and I drove home, and I forgot about it for exactly 9 days. The last thing I overheard by accident. I'd come to drop off a box of Gerald's old books my mother had asked for. The kitchen door was open a few inches. My mother and Colette were inside, and my mother's voice was pitched low and tight in a way I'd never heard from her. "After the wedding, the account just stops," she was saying. "You understand what that means. Everything it just stops. Can't you talk to her?" Colette's voice. "Make her wait?" "I've tried. She won't." I stood there with my hand flat against the door. I didn't push it open. I told myself it was Gerald's estate. I told myself it was grief making my mother strange. I told myself it was none of my business. And I set the box down on the step and drove home. And I let myself not know for 9 more days. If your family had spent your whole life telling you that you didn't quite belong, would you have pushed that door open or walked away like I did? Tell me below. I really want to know what you would have done. The morning of the wedding, I got dressed in a bridal room at an orchard estate outside Dundee, with the spring hills green through the window and my grandmother sitting in the corner chair. It was just the 2 of us. The family had gone quiet all week. No calls, no texts, no last-minute questions about the seating or the food, nothing. I told myself they were busy, or sulking, or saving their fuss for the day itself. A bride tells herself a lot of things. Opal had arrived at dawn with her hair already set, and she'd insisted on doing up the back of my dress herself, her paper hands moving over the long row of buttons, slow and sure. "Today undoes more than you know, child," she said, smoothing my veil down my back. I caught her eyes in the mirror. "Undoes what, Grandma?" She just patted my shoulder, the way she had at 100 dinner tables. Some things she'd been carrying too long to set down all at once. I let it go. I thought she meant getting older, getting married, a girl becoming a woman, the kind of thing grandmothers say. I was pinning the veil into my hair when both phones lit up at once. My mother first. I read it standing up, a pin still pinched between 2 fingers. "The whole family's talked it over. None of us will be attending. All 45 of us. This wedding is a mistake, and we will not put the Renner name on it." Then, before I could even set the phone down, the second one buzzed. "Colette, save yourself the shame and cancel." I read it twice. I want to be honest about what happened in my body, because people always expect a collapse, and there wasn't one. My face went hot, a flush climbing my neck. My mouth went dry. The pin slipped in my fingers, and I caught it, and then a strange, level calm came down over me. The calm I use at work, when a family is screaming across a conference table about who gets the house. I set the phone face down on the vanity, glass to the wood. I picked up the next pin. I kept going. There were 45 of them, and one of me. They had timed it for the morning of my wedding, when the dress was on, and the flowers were paid for, and the cars were already coming. They wanted me to read it in the mirror, in my veil. They wanted me to feel the shame in my own reflection and put it back on a hanger. Through the wall, I could hear the venue staff moving in the next room, and a voice, low, practical, asking someone whether the seating had changed, whether they should start folding down a few of the empty tables before the ceremony so the room wouldn't look so bare. Folding down the empty tables. 45 chairs, and somewhere on the other side of that wall, a person with a clipboard was already counting how many to wheel away before the people who weren't coming didn't come. I pressed my palm flat against the cold edge of the vanity and waited for the floor to feel like a floor again. I felt it. I'll admit that. For one long moment, I felt every folding chair, every blank line on a form, every hallway I'd stood in waiting to be called. It all stacked up behind my eyes at once, and my hand stopped, and I thought, maybe they're right. Maybe I am a fool standing here in a dress nobody's coming to see. My thumb moved toward Sam's name on the screen. To tell him, to start the sentence that ends a wedding. The room was very quiet. I could hear the hangers ticking in the open closet when the heat came on. I looked at myself in the mirror, the veil pinned, the dress that fit, a grown woman of 35 who'd paid for all of this herself. And for a second, I couldn't see her. I saw the 9-year-old who didn't go to the pancake thing, the 7-year-old at the corner of the table, the 12-year-old at the sink, told there was nothing to tell. 35 years of being told gently that I was lucky to be tolerated. And here was the bill for believing it. A dress, and a hall, and 45 empty chairs. My breath had gone high and shallow in my chest, the old hallway breath. I knew that breath. I'd been breathing it my whole life. I didn't finish it, because underneath the shame, there was a small, cold note that didn't match the rest. I read documents for a living. I read cruel messages between family members all the time. Disputes, threats, the ugly things people put in writing. And I knew the difference between contempt and something else. Contempt is lazy. Contempt doesn't organize 45 people and pick the exact hour. This had effort in it, coordination. This had something underneath it that wasn't discussed at all. My grandmother was watching me from her chair. She'd seen my face change, both times, the falling and the catching. "That's not contempt, Della," she said quietly. "That's fear. Read it again. Read it like one of your files." I looked down at the screen. "We will not put the Renner name on it." I read it the way she said. Not as a daughter, as a paralegal looking at a document that was trying to make someone do something. "They don't want me to be embarrassed," I said slowly. "They want me to stop." "Yes. 45 people don't agree on anything," I said. "Why would 45 people agree on this?" Opal stood. It took her a moment. It always did. She crossed the room and took both my hands in hers, and her grip was stronger than it had any right to be. "Because of what your wedding does," she said. "Sit down, Della. There's a thing I promised I'd keep until today. And today's come." I sat. The dress pooled around the little stool. Opal kept hold of one of my hands, and with her free one, she reached into the bag at her feet. "Your father never died," she said. The room didn't spin. I want to tell you it did, because that's how it's supposed to go. But it didn't. It just got very quiet and very clear, like the moment after you drop a glass and before it hits the floor. "His name is Edmund Marsh," my grandmother said, "and he's downstairs. He's parking the car." My own pulse came up into my ears. I could hear it. I sat there in my wedding dress and listened to my heart while my 84-year-old grandmother told me my father was parking the car. "You told me he died." My voice came out flat, careful. "She told me he died. 12 years old at the sink. She told me there was nothing to tell." "She told you that. I let her. I'm sorry. I'll be sorry for it the rest of my life." Opal's thumb moved over my knuckles. "Listen to me fast, because there's a reason they want you to cancel, and it isn't shame, and you need to understand it before you walk out that door." "Can you listen?" I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. "So she told me. Plainly, the way you finally tell a child the thing you should have told them long ago. My father, Edmund, had money. Not flashy money, old, quiet money, the kind that doesn't announce itself. When he and my mother split, before I was even born, he did something with it. He put a large sum into a trust. For me. He set it up so it couldn't be undone, and I couldn't be cut out. He couldn't be in your life, Opal said. There were reasons, and he'll tell you himself, and you can decide what you think of them. I'm not asking you to forgive anyone this morning, but he made sure you'd never go without. The money went to your mother every month, all these years, to raise you." "To raise me," I repeated. "That's what it was for. That's what it paid for." She held my eyes steady. "It paid for the house, Della. It paid for Colette's school, the good silver, the church pew, every Thanksgiving you ate at the corner of." I sat with that for a moment. I thought about the folding chair, the cold metal edge of it against the backs of my knees, dragged out because they'd run out of places. They hadn't run out of anything. The whole table, the whole house, the whole tidy Renner life that I'd been told I was lucky to sit at the edge of. I'd been the one paying for the seats. Every plate I was made to feel grateful for had been bought with money that had my name on the bottom of it. I almost laughed. It came up my throat and turned into nothing on the way. The floor seemed to tilt a few degrees. I put my free hand flat on the vanity to stay level. "And here's the part that's happening right now," my grandmother said. "The trust was written one particular way. The money came to your mother only while it was held for you. But the day you marry," she tapped the back of my hand once, firmly on each word. "The day you marry, it stops being held. It becomes yours, outright, and the checks to your mother end. Forever. That day." I am a trusts and estates paralegal. I have read this exact structure on paper 100 times. I have explained it to other people's families in slow, kind sentences, watching it land on their faces. And I sat in my own wedding dress and felt it land on me, from the inside, for the first time. The day I get married, I said, her income ends. Today? Opal said. Today, her income ends. That's what the account just stops was. That's what wait a year was. Every extra year you didn't marry was another year of checks. She squeezed my hand hard. It was never that you didn't belong, child. It's that you were paying for all of them. And they could not let you find that out before today. She looked at me a long moment then, and her voice dropped lower. I wanted to tell you 100 times. You have to believe that, but it would have been my word against your mother's, and nothing in your hand but an old woman's say-so. She'd have called me bitter and confused, and buried it, and moved you further out of my reach. And you'd have half believed her by supper, because that's what 35 years trains a person to do. There was never anything I could show you. Until today. Today, the paper says it for me. Today, there is nothing left for her to deny. There was a knock at the door. Soft. 2 knuckles. My grandmother didn't get up. She just looked at me and waited, and let me be the one to decide whether to open it. After a lifetime of waiting in hallways to be called in, she handed me the choice of who walked into the room. I stood. The dress whispered. I crossed to the door and opened it myself. He was an older man, early 60s, in a plain dark suit a little big through the shoulders, like he'd bought it for a heavier season of his life. He had a carpenter's hands, broad, the knuckles laced with thin, pale scars, a workingman's hand sticking out of Sunday cuffs. He stood in the doorway, like he wasn't sure he was allowed past it. Which, I realized later, was exactly how I'd stood my entire life. I know I'm a stranger to you, Edmund Marsh said. I'm not going to stand here and pretend I can be your father in one morning. I won't do that to you. I didn't say anything. I couldn't find the first word. I just don't want you walking down that aisle alone, he said. That's the only thing I came to ask, and if you'd rather I turn around and go, I will, and I won't make a sound about it. You don't owe me a single thing. His voice was rough and very careful, like he'd practiced staying level on the drive over. And his hands, when I finally reached out and took one of them, were warm and dry and shaking just slightly, the way you shake when you've waited a very long time for one thing, and it's finally in front of you, and you're afraid to want it too hard in case it's taken away again. He didn't try to fill the silence with 35 years of explanation. I'll always be grateful for that. He let me set the pace, and I set it slow, and the first thing I did was sit back down, because my legs needed it. It was Opal who handed me the box. A shoebox, soft-cornered with age, the lid held on with a rubber band gone brittle and gray. She returned them all, my grandmother said, every birthday, sent everyone back marked refused or wrong address. I couldn't let them just disappear into a bin somewhere, so I'd go get them, and I kept them. I took the lid off. The smell came up first. Dry, sweet, a woodshop smell. I knew it. I'd been carrying a sliver of it in a sock drawer for 30 years. Inside were the parcels. All of them. 35 years of them, smallest at the bottom, each one opened by my grandmother long ago, and then closed again and saved in order. Letters in those neat capitals. A few photographs. A younger Edmund standing beside a half-built wooden boat, squinting at the sun. One of him holding a tiny carved animal up to the camera, at arm's length, the way you'd hold a toy up to a baby through glass it couldn't reach through. And birthday cards, one for every year, each one written to a girl who never read it. I opened the one near the top. The handwriting was steady. Della, you're 17 today. I drove past your school once. I won't do it again. I promise. I hope you laugh a lot. Your father. That was all. No demands, no self-pity. A man checking in on a daughter who didn't know he was alive, year after year, asking nothing back. "Every year," Edmund said very quietly, watching me read. She sent everyone back. After a while, I stopped expecting an answer. I just couldn't stop sending them. Felt like if I stopped, you'd really be gone. I set the card down. My throat had closed, and I let it stay closed. I wasn't ready to make a sound. There was one envelope at the top of the box that didn't match the others. Stiffer. Official. I lifted it out and slid the pages free. It was the trust, the actual instrument. A copy, decades old, the cover page foxed brown at the edges. I read it the way I read documents at work, which is to say I read it like a surgeon, past the boilerplate, straight into the operative clauses. And there it was, in language I could have recited in my sleep, an irrevocable trust, settled the year I was born. The income paid to my mother for as long as the trust ran, and the trust was written to run until the day I married. Its purpose, set down in my father's own words on the page, to provide for the home where his daughter would be raised. And the remainder, the entire principal, vesting in me, outright and free of trust, upon my marriage. The principal itself, the figure my eye went to out of pure habit, the way it always goes to the bottom line of a file, was a little over $3.5 million. I read the number and felt nothing move. It was just a number on a page. The shoebox of letters at my knee weighed more than it did. They'd thought they owned it. 35 years of acting like it was theirs to manage, theirs to budget, theirs to threaten and ration and protect. They never owned a cent of it. They only ever held the income, never the principal, and only for as long as I stayed unmarried. The day I married, the income stopped and the owning began, and the owner was the girl on the folding chair. The money that built their whole tidy life had had my name waiting at the bottom of it the entire time. I read the distribution schedule next, the running record of what had been paid out and when. Line after line, month after month, 35 years of it. Then I folded the page closed and set it back in the box, see, under the cards. Why? I asked Edmund instead. It was the only question that actually mattered. If you had all this, if you were an hour away the whole time, why was I on a folding chair? He looked down at his own hands for a moment, turning one of them over. Your mother and I ended badly, he said. And then she had you, and she had every advantage in the law about who you'd live with. I could have fought her. Lawyers, custody hearings, years of it. I sat across a desk from a man who did that kind of work, and I asked him what it does to a kid. All that. Being pulled back and forth across a war for 10 years. Being asked at 6, at 8, which parent you love more. He shook his head, slow. I couldn't do that to you, so I did the one thing I could think of that wouldn't tear you down the middle. I made sure the money would always be there, and I made sure it would all come to you the day you started your own life. I tied it to your wedding day on purpose, the day you'd have a home of your own and wouldn't need the one I was paying for. And I asked the trustee to keep the whole thing quiet until then, so no one could use it against you before you were grown. And I stepped back, and I waited by the door I'd built for 35 years. When you were grown, I thought about knocking. God knows I thought about it, but a woman who's been told her whole life that her father's in the ground doesn't need a stranger turning up to call her mother a liar. I was afraid you'd think it was a con, or that I'd blow your life apart for nothing and you'd hate me for it. So I kept writing the letters she kept sending back, and your grandmother kept watch from the inside, and the two of us made a quiet pact. He glanced at Opal. There was one day your mother couldn't keep me from the door. The day somebody would have to walk you down an aisle. I decided I'd rather wait 35 years for that one open door than force a single one she'd just slam in front of you. My hand had gone into my bag without me deciding it. My fingers found the little wooden bird, the warm one, the one Opal had pressed into my fist under a table when I was 5, and I drew it out into the light of the bridal room. I turned it over, and I saw the cuts in it for the first time, really saw them. The small, patient strokes of a knife, the careful grain of the wing. I looked up from the bird in my palm to the carpenter's hands of the man standing in the doorway of my wedding, and I understood, all at once, who had made it, who had carried it pale in his pocket before it ever reached a sock drawer. Who'd been telling me, in the only language he was allowed, "Someone loves you," for 30 years. I could have called my mother right then. I want you to know I thought about it. Hard. I had her number, I had the trust, I had the records, the truth, and a father standing in the room. I could have dialed her and read her the clause and listened to her go silent for the first time in her life. I actually picked up the phone. I let my thumb rest on her name. I could feel the shape of what I'd say. I knew exactly how it would go. I'd read her the clause in my flattest work voice, the one I use on people who think they've already won. I let her hear the word irrevocable and watch her not understand it, then understand it. There'd be a silence on the line, the first time in my life I'd ever heard her have nothing ready. Some part of me had wanted that silence for 35 years. I could have it now. It was right there under my thumb. Then I turned the screen off and set it down. I'm not going to argue with them, I told Opal. I'm going to get married. Because here's what I understood, sitting there with a carved bird in one hand and a trust in the other. They had built this entire morning to make me cancel. The texts, the timing, the 45 names withdrawn all at once. Every piece of it engineered to make me fold. Before the wedding could happen and the income stopped. If I called my mother now and fought, if I made the day a battle, I would be doing exactly what they wanted. I'd be giving them a reason. I'd be putting myself right back where I'd always been, explaining myself, defending myself, standing in a hallway asking to be let in. I wasn't going to fight for the morning. I was just going to walk through it. You don't have to win the morning, my grandmother said, reading my face as she always could. You just have to walk down that aisle. Let the rest take care of itself. But I'm my own kind of careful. So before I let the rest take care of itself, I made one call. Not to my mother, to a man named Russell Brandt, the trustee, the one who'd quietly administered my father's trust for 35 years, whose name was printed on the cover page in my hands. Opal had his number. I asked him if he could come to the venue that morning and bring the file, the complete file. He said he could be there in 40 minutes. He didn't ask why. I think, after 35 years, he'd been half expecting the call. Then I went out to look at the room where it would happen. It was a long stone hall, the kind of place that used to be a barn and got beautiful with age. Chairs in neat rows, white ribbon tied at the ends, tall windows full of gold hills. I walked up the center of it, toward the front. And I stopped, because there was a chair at the front with a small card propped on the seat. The card had my name on it. Della, in careful capitals. The same hand as 35 years of envelopes. A chair, in the front row, with my name saved on it, waiting, before I'd even walked into the room. The exact opposite of a metal chair dragged from a garage because they'd run out of places. Somebody had set a place for me before I arrived. I stood there and looked at it for a long time. Sam came up the aisle behind me and saw what I was looking at. "Front row," he said, soft. "Where you can see me." "Always." I picked the card up off the seat and held it. The capitals were the same as the ones on 35 years of envelopes in a shoebox upstairs, though Sam didn't know that, and I didn't tell him yet. He just saw a card with my name on it and a bride staring at it like it was the strangest thing in the room. "Who set this here?" he asked. Someone who's been saving me a seat a long time, I said. I'll explain after. I promise. He didn't push. That's the other thing about Sam. He can tell the difference between a secret and a wound. And he waited. I hadn't told him everything yet. There wasn't time, and there was too much of it. I just let him take my hand in front of a chair that had been mine before I ever walked into the room. If you've ever had to choose between the people who actually showed up and the ones who only ever wanted something from you, I want to hear about it. Tell me below who your real family turned out to be. I read every single one, and then the doors at the far end of the hall swung open, and the cold air came in off the hills, and they came after all. Not 45 of them. My mother, Colette. A handful of aunts and uncles in their good coats, fanned out behind her like a delegation. They had not come to celebrate. 5 hours had passed, and the wedding still hadn't been canceled, and so they had come, in person, to do the canceling themselves. My mother's heels struck the stone floor, sharp and even, all the way up the aisle. "Stop this," she said. "Right now. Before you embarrass all of us." I want to describe this carefully, because it's the part I've replayed the most, and because how it happened matters more than that it happened. There were people in that hall already. Sam's parents, in the second row. His sister. A dozen of his friends, seated, programs in their laps. The officiant by the front, a small woman with a folder. 2 women from the venue in their work blacks, frozen by the side door, not sure whether to intervene. Maybe 30 witnesses in all. And every single one of them turned to watch my mother march up the aisle of my wedding to tell me to stop. She did not lower her voice for them. She raised it. She was performing now, not for me, for the room. "I am her mother," she announced, turning so the seated guests could all hear. "And I am only trying to stop her from humiliating herself in front of all of you. This marriage is a mistake. The whole family has said so. I'm so sorry you've come out here for this." She swept a hand at me, at the dress, like I was an exhibit she was explaining. "She doesn't think clearly. She never has. We've protected her from herself her whole life." That was the lie. The first move. I'm only trying to protect her. The selfless mother stepping in to save a foolish daughter from her own poor judgment. Colette took her cue. "Save yourself the shame, Della," she said loud, the same 4 words from the text now out in the open air of the room. "Just cancel. People will understand. It's not too late to walk out with your dignity." A few of Sam's friends shifted in their seats. His mother had gone very still. The officiant looked from my mother to me and back, her pen frozen over her folder. Sam stepped up beside me then. He didn't say anything to my mother. He just took my hand, the way he had in front of the chair, and turned to face the aisle with me. One of his friends in the 3rd row said, quietly but not quietly enough, "Is she serious right now?" Nobody answered him. The 2 women from the venue had stopped pretending not to watch. The whole room was waiting for me to break. My mother was waiting for it most of all, leaning slightly forward, ready to step in the second I crumbled, ready to take my arm and lead me out, ready to let the day dissolve. That was the entire design, that I'd shatter in front of the witnesses, and they'd guide me away, and the wedding would simply not happen, and the checks would keep arriving on the 1st of every month. I didn't shatter. I didn't raise my voice either. I just stood very straight at the front of that hall in my mother's silence, and when the noise of them finally died down, I asked her one quiet question. "You drove an hour," I said. "Even. Clear. To stop a wedding you weren't going to attend. Why?" She blinked, the smallest hitch. "Because I'm your mother and I can't watch you." "No," I said. Not loudly, just enough to cut the line clean. "Try again. What stops after today?" Her mouth opened. "You said it in your kitchen," I went on, before she could find the script. 9 days ago. I was at the door. You said, "After the wedding, the account just stops. So tell the room." "What account?" For the first time in my entire life, I watched my mother's face go looking for a script and not find one. It was a strange thing to see, after 35 years of watching her always know exactly what to say to me. I don't know what you think you overheard, she said. You've always been dramatic, Della. You twist things. This is exactly the kind of... Deny it again, I said. Slower. Look at them while you do it. She glanced at the room, at Sam's mother, at the venue staff, at 30 faces watching her, and something flickered behind her eyes. The calculation of a woman realizing the audience might not be hers. So she changed tactics. She turned to the room, arms open, and made me the ungrateful one. Do you see what I live with? She said, after everything this family has done for her. We took her in, we raised her as our own, and she'd humiliate me, her mother, like this, in public, on a day like this. Her voice wobbled, exactly on cue. I came here out of love, that's all, out of love. Out of love, I repeated. Yes. Then attend my wedding, I said. She had no answer for that. The silence stretched. An aunt behind her looked at the floor. Sam's mother, 2 rows back, said clear and dry, She drove an hour to stop it. A few heads turned toward my mother, and I watched her feel the room move under her feet, the first time the count had ever gone against her, instead of against me. What account, Mom? I said again. Quiet. Patient. You keep not answering. The handful of them who had come, and a few had, 2 aunts, an uncle, a woman from my mother's church pew, hadn't come for a wedding. They'd come to stand behind her while she stopped one. The small delegation she'd brought along to witness me fold quietly and be walked out. Now, they were the ones who looked like they wanted to be walked out. Colette had stopped talking. I noticed it the way you notice a sound cut out. She'd used up the 4 words she'd been handed, and with no script of her own, she just stood at our mother's shoulder, no longer an enforcer, only a younger sister reading the room, late, that she'd helped set up. A phone that had been half raised in the back row came down. Somewhere a chair scraped as someone shifted, putting a foot of space between themselves and my mother. Nobody had decided anything out loud. The hall had simply, quietly, begun to choose. And that was when my grandmother stepped forward. She came up beside me, small and straight, and she put one paper-light hand flat against my back. The same hand that had taken mine in the bridal room an hour before. The same hand that had pressed a carved bird into my fist under a table 30 years before and whispered, "Someone loves you." "Sylvia," Opal said to my mother. "Stop now." My mother turned to her own mother, and for half a second, her face opened with something like relief. Here, at last, was an ally. Here was the older generation come to put a stop to all this and take her side. "Mom," she said, "tell her she's being ridiculous. Tell her—" "I kept your secret for 35 years, Opal said. Her voice did not shake. It carried, thin and clear, all the way down the stone hall. "I'm done keeping it for you." The room went quiet in a different way than before. My mother's mouth was still half open. One of the aunts behind her took a small step sideways, away, the first crack in the delegation. I turned toward the side door, where a man in a gray suit had come in a few minutes earlier and stood waiting against the wall, a leather folder under his arm. Russell Brandt. He'd made it in 38 minutes. "Mr. Brandt," I said, "would you bring the records up here, please?" He came up the center aisle, unhurried, with the patience of a man who handles documents all day. He set the leather folder on the small table at the front, right beside the chair with my name on it. And he opened it. The whole hall was watching the folder now. Even my mother. "Mr. Brandt," I said, pitched loud enough for the last row, "would you tell everyone in this room where the money came from?" He didn't editorialize. Trustees don't. He put on a pair of reading glasses and read from the schedule in a dry, level voice, like someone reading minutes at a meeting nobody wanted to attend. "This trust was established the year Ms. Marsh was born," he said. "It is irrevocable. It cannot be altered or revoked. For 35 years, it has distributed its income to Ms. Sylvia Renner, for as long as that income was hers to receive under the trust, which was only until her daughter married. The principal was never hers. By the terms set down the year Della Marsh was born, it has belonged in full to one person, Della Marsh." He turned a page. "The income has averaged roughly $11,000 a month. Those funds supported the Renner household, the residence, private school tuition, day-to-day living expenses for over 3 decades. He looked up, once, over the glasses. "To be plain, for 35 years this family has lived on a trust that belongs to Della." The sound that moved through the room wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. It was the low rush of 30 people understanding the same thing at the same moment. Chairs creaking, a breath sucked in here, a murmur there. Sam's mother turned and looked at me with her hand pressed flat to her chest. One of the aunts behind my mother said, "Sylvia," in a small, horrified voice, and took another step back. And Colette sat down, hard. In the nearest chair, like her legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold her. She'd grown up certain that the house was hers, and I was the guest in it. She was doing the arithmetic now, right there in front of everyone, and you could watch the answer reach her face. The pony, the streamers, the big backyard birthdays, the tuition, the good life, all of it had been bought with the money meant for the girl at the corner of the table. My mother had gone the color of paper. "That money was for raising her," she said, and her voice cracked up out of its careful register into something high and thin. "Do you have any idea what it costs to raise a child? To give her a home, a name, a family? Everything I did so she would have a roof over her head." She flung an arm toward me, and her voice climbed higher. "She owes this family. After everything we gave her, she owes us." There it was. She hanged herself with it in front of every witness in the room, and I never had to say a word. Because the room had just heard a man in reading glasses read out, from the records, that the roof was bought with my money. And now they heard my mother stand in front of my wedding and shout that I owed her for it. The two sentences could not survive in the same air. You could watch the witnesses choose in real time which one to believe. They chose the one with the paper behind it. I said nothing. I let the silence do the work. My mother's chest was heaving and her hands were out and her voice kept climbing, about sacrifice, about gratitude, about everything she'd given up for me. And the more she talked, the smaller she got, because every word out of her mouth was about money now, and the whole room could hear it. The officiant had lowered her folder. Sam's father was on his feet. Nobody was looking at me as the foolish daughter anymore. They were looking at her. The aunt who'd said Sylvia had backed all the way to the wall now, a hand still at her mouth. One of the uncles took out his phone and then, thinking better of it, put it away, like he didn't want a record of which side he'd been standing on. A woman I half recognized, a friend of my mother's, someone from the church pew, got up quietly from her seat and walked out the side door and didn't come back. Colette hadn't moved from her chair. She had her face in her hands. I'd waited 35 years to see this family rearrange itself, and it was happening in front of me, chair by chair, person by person, and I felt no joy in it. Just a strange, level quiet, like the end of a long noise. And then the man in the plain, dark suit, who had stood quietly against the wall through all of it, stepped forward where she could finally see him. My mother saw Edmund Marsh, alive, in a Sunday suit, standing at the front of his daughter's wedding, and she stopped. Mid-sentence. Just stopped, like a thread cut with scissors. Whatever was in her face then, I don't have a word for. I'd never seen her afraid before. "You told her I was dead," Edmund said. He didn't shout. He sounded almost gentle, and somehow that was worse. 35 years, Sylvia. You sent back every letter I wrote, and you told a little girl her father was in the ground. He didn't wait for her answer. There wasn't one she could give. He turned to me instead, and he held out one of those broad, scarred carpenter's hands. "I've got her now," he said, to me, to the room, to all of them. "You can keep your chairs." The aunts and uncles were already stepping back from my mother, the delegation coming apart, nobody wanting to be the one still standing beside her. Colette wouldn't lift her eyes from the floor. My mother stood alone in the middle of the aisle of my wedding. I could have walked down it and taken the last word. I could have made her smaller than she already was, in front of all of them. I didn't. I took an envelope from the small table. I'd had Brant prepare it that morning. A single page, the trustees' formal notice that the distributions would end as of that day, and beneath it, in my own careful capitals, one line. "You can keep the silver." I set it on the table in front of her. I didn't say anything about it. I turned and I put my hand in my father's hand, and I faced the far end of the hall, where Sam was waiting, and a chair sat with my name saved on it. "I'm not going to fight you for the last word, Sylvia," I said without turning around. It was the first time in my life I'd called her by her name instead of Mom, and I already knew it would be the last. "I'm going to go get married." And I did. It's been some months now. My father carves. I knew that the morning of the wedding, looking from a wooden bird to his hands. But I learned the size of it slowly, the way you're supposed to learn a person. Over dinners, over time, in no hurry. Because we have the time now. There's a shelf in our house. On the shelf, there's a row of small carved birds. Wrens mostly. 35 of them, give or take, because he made one every year I was gone and kept them in a drawer the same way Opal kept the letters in a box. Proof of a love that had nowhere to land. The first one I set on that shelf was the warm one. The one from the sock drawer. The one my mother once held over a trash can and called a cheap little thing. I know now whose thumb wore it pale before it ever reached my hand, and how far it traveled to get there, and how long. One for every year I missed, my father said when he saw them all lined up in a row. I just couldn't hand them to you yet. He's teaching me to carve, a little, on Sunday afternoons. I'm bad at it. My first one barely looks like a bird. More like a potato with intentions. He keeps it on the shelf anyway, at the end of the row, after his 35. It counts, he says, every time I try to move it somewhere less visible. Opal sits with us while we work, in the good chair by the window, and tells me things about him I missed, that he hums when he concentrates, that he can't throw anything away, that he drove past my school exactly once and never again because he'd promised. I'm collecting a father in pieces, late, out of order. It's slow. It's enough. I don't speak to my mother. I'm told she kept the house, for now, and that the money to keep it is gone, and that she and Colette have grown a great deal quieter than they used to be. I don't wish either of them harm. I want to be clear about that. This was never about harm. I just don't have a chair for them anymore. That, it turns out, is allowed. You are allowed to stop saving a place for people who never once saved one for you. We have a long table now. My father's table, with Opal at the head of it, and Sam beside me, and a chair, always. That's only ever been mine. Not a folding chair, not one dragged in from a garage because they ran out of places and didn't think of me until the others were seated. A real chair with a solid back to it that nobody has to be asked to pull. They saved 45 chairs for a wedding I had anyway. I only ever needed one. And it was always mine.